All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're unpacking one of the most infamous, most spectacular tech failures of our time, the launch of healthcare.gov. This was a project with billions of dollars on the line, the health of millions of people at stake, and on day one, it just didn't work. So just how bad was it? I mean, really. After all the hype, after hundreds of millions of dollars were spent, this number right here, that's how many people successfully signed up for health insurance on launch day. Across the entire country, 6. You heard me right, just 6. And what about the hundreds of thousands of other people who are desperately trying to sign up? Well, their experience was a total nightmare of endless loading screens, website crashes, and cryptic error messages. As one of the first users put it so perfectly, it just kept spinning, nothing happened. A massive national project, defeated by the spinning wheel of death. So you have to ask, how could a project this important, with a full weight of the White House behind it, go so catastrophically wrong? Well, the story of that October 1st disaster, it doesn't really start on launch day. No, it starts way, way earlier. The truth is, this website was pretty much doomed long before a single person ever tried to log in. The problems you see, they weren't just in the code. They were buried deep in the project's foundation, which was just this chaotic mess of organizational dysfunction and, believe it or not, cultural warfare. At the heart of it all was this massive culture clash. See, the project started inside this new office that was trying to run like a tech startup, fast, agile, innovative, but it was quickly swallowed up by its polar opposite, a gigantic, slow-moving, rigid government bureaucracy. It was basically a collision course from day one. And the consequences of that clash, they were absolutely devastating. There was no single person in charge, no one driving the ship. Key director roles were like a revolving door. People were lasting less than a year. Teams literally didn't know what other teams were responsible for. It created this huge vacuum of leadership where nobody could make a final call. Now, all this organizational chaos, it didn't just stay in the meeting rooms. Oh no, it seeped directly into the code itself, creating the perfect storm for a technical failure. I mean, with no clear leadership and constantly shifting requirements, the developers were basically fighting a losing battle from the start. On paper, the engineering teams were supposedly using a modern development process called Scrum. The whole point of a framework like Scrum is to keep these huge, complex projects from failing by breaking the work down into small, manageable chunks. And the idea is a really simple loop. You plan the work, you sprint for a couple of weeks to get it done, you review what you've built, and then you repeat the cycle. This process is supposed to prevent projects from spiraling out of control by forcing constant check-ins and feedback. But in reality, the whole process was completely broken. Management would constantly show up and demand huge changes right in the middle of a sprint. I mean, can you imagine trying to build a house, and while the concrete foundation is being poured, someone runs in and says, "Actually, let's add a basement"? That's exactly what was happening. It just shattered the workflow and sent developers scrambling. And the result was a technical nightmare at every single level. The code was so bad that a single click on the website could trigger hundreds of separate database lookups. They weren't doing regular testing, so one developer's change could break the entire system, and no one would even notice for weeks. It got so bad that developers were literally overwriting each other's work. This wasn't just messy, it was total chaos. So, as that October 1st deadline got closer and closer, the warning signs went from being quiet whispers to deafening, screaming alarms. But instead of hitting the brakes, the leadership team just pressed even harder on the accelerator. This final countdown to launch it's brutal to look at. 3 months out, a simple demo for creating an account fails, revealing over 100 bugs. A month later, another demo fails so spectacularly that they have to resort to showing static pictures of the site instead. And then, get this, just 3 days before launch, they finally run a performance test and discover the site can't handle even a tiny fraction of the people they expect. Every single alarm bell was ringing off the hook. So, with all these obvious failures, you're probably wondering, why didn't they just run one big test of the whole system from end to end? Well, the engineer's grim answer was simple. You can't test what isn't built. Key parts of the website were still under construction right up to the end. A dark joke started going around the office that became the unofficial strategy. The public launch, that would be the test. And so, the site launched, and immediately crashed and burned, just as anyone could have predicted. With a massive national crisis now on their hands, the White House had no choice but to call in a tech A-team, basically the best engineers they could find from across the country, to come in and fix this unbelievable mess. The rescue team got in there and pretty quickly discovered that the entire website was being crippled by a single component. It was an identity verification service, basically the front door to the whole website. And that front door was massively underpowered. It's like building a giant football stadium for 250,000 people, but only installing one tiny locked turnstile at the entrance. So the A-team got to work. These folks worked 24-hour shifts, sleeping in nearby hotel rooms, and the results they got were just staggering. In early November, the site was down about 90% of the time, but by the end of that same month, they had completely flipped that number, achieving 90% uptime. It was an absolutely incredible turnaround. So, with the fires finally put out, what can we actually learn from all this wreckage? The story of healthcare.gov really serves as a masterclass in how not to run a large-scale tech project. And the price of that failure was, well, it was immense. First, let's just talk about the financial cost. The total contract value for the main companies involved ballooned from an initial $464 million to over $824 million. That's nearly double the original budget. One contractor saw their pay just about quadruple. This wasn't just a technical failure, it was a staggering financial disaster. And that really brings us to our final thought here. You know, the numbers on a spreadsheet are one thing, but when a project this public, this important, fails so spectacularly, what's the true cost? It's not just about the money, is it? It's about the loss of public trust, the political fallout, and the very real impact it has on the millions of people who are counting on it to work. And that's a lesson that goes far, far beyond the code.